Where and when were you born?
I was born in Zimbabwe, 8 April 1990.
So you're an Aries, the ram, in your sun sign.
Sorry?
April 8th, I think Aries, the ram, the in term.
Yes,
And do you
yes.
identify with being a strong-willed, forward-moving person?
Oh, yeah, definitely I do.
What are other words, like 3 words to describe you for someone who didn't know you?
I'm I'm strong, number one. Number two, I'm a bit calm. Number three, I'm a hard worker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and do you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I do.
Where are you in the birth order? Who came?
I'm the last born. I'm the
Okay.
last born in a family of four. And I happen to be the last born, three girls, one boy.
And are your siblings involved in climate change as well?
No, not at all. We are in different fields actually. They are more, my family is more into the health part. I think I'm the only environmentalist in the family.
Hmm. And what do your parents think of your activism?
Well, they are quite supportive. It's not like they've objected because when I decided that I'm going to study environmental science at school, they were actually supportive.
Hmm.
Actually, my guardians, because my parents passed away way back, so they're actually supportive of doing the subject, doing the course, and I was very much interested, so they don't have any problems with that.
Wonderful. Where are you in school?
I'm at Bindura University, currently now doing my MSc in food security and sustainable agriculture.
Um, is there government support for students to go to university? In places like the U.S., students graduate with $25,000 average in debt. So going to university is a strain. What about in Zimbabwe?
Oh, so education in Zimbabwe is quite reasonable. The fees are quite reasonable, but not everyone can afford to attend university because of different backgrounds. The government used to have support system for students, vulnerable students that would want to attend university or that were having difficulties in paying their universities, which they called the cadetship program. So I was part of the cadetship program, I think in my second year. So till I finished my fourth year, I was part of the cadetship program. So it actually pays something like 75% of your fees, then you can finish off the rest. So those programs are there, and we also have other companies that are willing to chip in. But yeah, they are there, but they had to remove the cadetship program. So which means most people that relied on it, they kind of like had some challenges.
Oh, it doesn't exist anymore, the program?
Um, no, it doesn't exist, but they are trying to come up with another program that will actually assist with students that are in university.
Zimbabwe went through big upheaval when your longtime leader was asked to remove himself from office. Have things settled down, or is it still kind of in turmoil?
Well, I think we're still trying to get back on our feet. Um, Everyone knows the Zimbabwean story, what happened, the supposed coup and stuff, but we're still trying to get back on our feet. It's not easy, but that is where you see opportunities for young people also coming up to play the role of young people, maybe in demanding for emergency action, not only climate action, but in terms of sustainability, sustainable development, in terms of our economy, in terms of our social and everything else.
How influential were young people in advocating for the change of government?
Of course, everyone was frustrated because, if these leaders are making their decisions up there, it will not really affect them, but it will affect the generations and more generations to come. So everyone was very frustrated about that, and everyone was just wishing for a change to come, that kind of freedom which you receive when you're being suppressed. So young people, they actually played a very significant role. They were marching, demonstrating in the streets, using their social media platforms, expressing themselves till eventually it happened.
Mm-hmm. And were you involved in that struggle as well?
Unfortunately, I wasn't involved in the struggle. I'm not a very political person, in as much as I appreciate the role that people did or are still doing. I'm not so much into politics. The problem with African politics is at times, if you're demonstrating for your rights, they easily identify you with a certain political party, and it can be very, very violent. So I just avoid.
Got it. How many languages do you speak?
I speak 4 languages. That's English, Shona, Ndebele, and Tonga, Malawian Tonga.
Uh-huh. When it seems to me that tribal affiliations are still really strong in Africa, and in the past, before missionaries changed the whole support system, it was very supportive, and it gave people structure and as I said, support. And then the missionaries came and broke up a lot of the traditions, and then tribalism became, I would say, divisive, and who's in your tribe is who you support in your government position. So corruption was involved. So could you say a word about tribal influences now?
Um, yeah. So the thing is, when the missionary came, I'll give an example of my country because I relate better to it. We are having problems of identity problems, and this is where the struggle comes from. People have lost their identity. So you find out that if you lose your identity, you don't know what you're fighting for at the end of the day, because you end up associating yourself with some people's identities. So these are the challenges that we've been facing. We have a lot of different traditions, different cultures, especially here in Zimbabwe, but at times, because we fail to identify our identity, then that thing of Pan-Africanism is not in us, because we always believed and we grew up believing that what the Western people taught us is true. But I want to tell you that when you identify yourself, when you know your identity, what we call or refer to as, in my native language, Hunu, in Ndebele, Ubuntu in English, it's humanity. If you identify where you come from, you have those, and it actually it guides you on the decisions that you're going to make, present and future decisions, which means that all the issues to do with peace, all the issues to do with security, they automatically feed into Ubuntu or Ubuntu, and they shape up the world we are living in.
So do you identify more with being a Pan-African person or with your tribal background in terms of your identity?
Well, I'd love to define myself as a Pan-African person because it's very difficult for me to identify myself as with another tradition, because I'm Malawian, number one, simply because my parents were Malawian, but I was born in Zimbabwe. So the only thing that I have that is Malawian is the language that I know. But in terms of the tradition, in terms of the beliefs, in terms of the cultures, some of them, they've been lost along the way because I I grew up in Zimbabwe. So it's better for me to identify myself as a true Pan-Africanist, because that way I know that in as much as I'm not aware of some of the traditions, the Malawian culture, or the Malawian culture and some of the Zimbabwean culture traditions, I can still identify myself as an African person, a true Pan-Africanist.
So let's say you have children. What values will you teach them that are part of their Malawian or their Zimbabwean or their African tradition? This is what's important to us, and this is what's bedrock.
Yeah, so what's really important, like I mentioned about humanity. Humanity is the first thing that I would definitely teach my child, that before everything else, before the politics, before the science, there's what we call humanity. Humanity even guides work ethics. It's guided by humanity. Not only that, but some of the decisions that we make in life, it's also guided by humanity, because humanity teaches you not to be selfish. Um, it teaches you to consider other people before you consider yourself. It gives you that sort of like sustainable thinking before you decide to think of anything else. But if you have humanity, I think it really guides you. And this is some of the things that I would love to teach my children, the importance of humanity.
Mm. Other influences are animism, Islam, Christianity. Have any of those kinds of belief systems influenced your thinking?
Yes, definitely. In as much as I'm a true Pan-Africanist, I'm also a Christian, and everything that I do, I relate it to the Word of God. When God created everything, it was beautiful. So I feel like we should be responsible citizens, because we were made custodians of what God gave us. So everything that I do, I relate it to the Word of God, which is the Bible, and I'm a true Christian. And before I do anything, I put God first.
Mm. This is another topic, but people are really concerned about the coronavirus now around the world. Are there cases in Zimbabwe and in Africa? Because people are really worried because the health system may not be adequate to deal with it if the cases come there.
Oh yes, we are very worried because, like I said, we are Pan-Africanist and we put humanity first. So, in as much as this virus, COVID-19, started affecting Asian countries, it really affects us because we are all human. So we were really affected, and we were actually scared because we share a border with South Africa, and it has a lot of cases that are coming up of COVID-19, and we are trying to put in very strategic measures on how we can try to protect our people here in Zimbabwe from the virus. So yeah, we are very concerned and we are very worried.
Mm. In the U.S., there's this crazy thing that people started hoarding toilet paper and buying up rolls and rolls of toilet paper, which doesn't make any sense. So it's interesting how people react when they're afraid.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some of the panic measures that people tend to, but then it's also good to act based on an informed point of view. It's also good for individuals to try to do their own research on what this virus is and how it's going to affect them, their families, their countries, and how maybe tissue paper is linked to, to the virus. So besides being alarmed about the virus, it's also good for everyone to do their own research on how best they can try to protect their families and their country.
People here are trying not to shake hands or hug. Is that happening there as well? Not to touch people?
Not really, because like I said, we have not had any cases of coronavirus. So in as much as people are really scared, but it really has not reached to that extent. But like I said, we share a border with a country which has a lot of cases now on coronavirus. We should start adapting to that so as to avoid any spreading of the virus.
How did you get interested and aware of the immediacy of climate change?
I personally feel like it was a calling. Yeah, that's what I say. I usually tell people that to me, I think this was a calling because previously I used to be in the media field. I used to be an actress. I used to be a musician. But then because I wasn't doing so well, my grades were dropping. I had to leave. I had to choose what I wanted, whether I wanted my education or I wanted my career. So I dropped my career and I started focusing on my education, which led me to be very interested about environmental conservation and climate action.
So, was it your teachers that were the main influence on your awareness?
Yes, definitely my teachers really played a very important part, but also um, the place I did my internship, they really contributed much to the work that I've done so far. We call it the Environmental Management Agency. I had very good supervisors and I was a bit flexible to do some experiments. I mean, I would run around doing environmental education in a lot of schools, interacting with children, passing information, environmental information, doing debates, quiz. They really contributed to the work that I have done up to today. So, yeah, they were very influential.
Was that an NGO or a government agency?
It's a parastatal.
It's a pardon? What?
It's a parastatal.
What does that
We
mean?
call it it's not an NGO, it's not a government agency, but I can say it's a department of the government, but we call them parastatal.
Oh. So
Yeah.
they get money from the government, but they try to be independent?
Yes.
Got it. And then after you left your internship, what did you focus on in terms of your activism?
So after my internship, I had to go back to school to finish my BSc. But when you finish your BSc, you do not automatically get a job. I mean, it's not that easy. I mean, when we're growing up, people would tell us that after you finish your school, it's easy for you to get a job, but it wasn't that easy. Then I got an opportunity to volunteer for an organization, and they were trying to establish the climate change office, but they didn't know how. So I got an opportunity to work for them, but it was through volunteerism. So I volunteered for, I think, 8 to 9 months, and I was the climate change officer, and I had one or two assistants. So it really opened up my mind. I was exposed, not in terms of traveling, but exposed to what Africa can do in terms of mitigating the effects of climate change, exposed in terms of what the opportunities that are there for young people in terms of maybe climate change adaptation or climate change awareness.
What are some examples of what you taught young people about what they can do themselves, not just know about it, but do something?
The other thing I tell the children or young people is on the issue to do with reducing their carbon footprint and their attitude, especially attitude, because if you do not have the right attitude, it means you cannot be a good person to conserve the environment. So everything starts within the mind. If you have told your mind that you're not going to litter, then you will not litter no matter what. Even if you have eaten something and there is no being close to you, you will not litter. So these are some of the things that we teach young people and how best they can be innovative in issues to do with the renewable energy, because that's where we are heading to, and how best they can actually contribute in policy formulation. So this is usually our message. They should first know the effects of climate change. They should first understand global warming, then they understand climate change and come up with innovative ways they can mitigate or adapt to the effects of climate change.
Are there governments in other countries that you look to as a model? Like I think of Germany is doing a lot with solar, making solar panel available even to individual families, and a lot of activism about not starting new coal mines. Who do you look to for ideas about how to take action?
There are countries like Singapore that are doing well in terms of infrastructure. When I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm referring to green buildings. They have managed to do so well in terms of green buildings, and I wish if we could also use that kind of strategy. Of course, we have a very good example here in Zimbabwe, the Eastgate Mall, which is one of the most talked about green building in Africa. But we just don't want it to be one. We want a lot of green buildings because the issues to do with global warming, climate change, they go as deep as development is concerned. So as we are developing, we should start thinking green, and Singapore has been a very good example. Not also to mention other countries like Germany, which you mentioned, even China itself, even if it's also a second power, but it has a lot of solar plants that it have that they are still trying to establish at the moment, feeding into their national grids. So I also wish if we could have like huge farms of solar panels, which can help us not to rely on coal, but we'll be able to rely on renewable energy through the implementation of solar projects.
How much of that is happening in Zimbabwe in terms of solar panels and wind and those kind of renewable resources?
So the thing is, in Zimbabwe, we do not have a plant that manufactures solar panels, which means that we have to import solar panels, and at times there are costs that are there when it comes to importing. I mean, you have to pay duty, etc., issues like that. And when it comes to wind energy, there's still some surveys that are still being done if we are able to have some wind turbines being implemented in any of the cities. So in as much as it is a good way, because it encourages us not to rely more on fossil fuels, but to import, it makes it a bit, it's actually a constraint in itself. It makes it a bit challenging, a bit difficult.
The
But either
cost.
way, yes. But either way, people are a lot of negotiations with the government, if they can give incentives to people that are importing solar panels. They don't have to pay a lot of taxes compared to other people because they are promoting renewable energy.
Mm. What else do you do personally? Like one thing that people are talking about is clothes. Fashion uses a lot of resources, so we can buy used secondhand clothes. Is what I do. I don't buy new clothes. Um, what what other things? What can you do? Are you doing as an individual?
What I'm doing as an individual, we are working on uh, reducing my carbon footprint. This is through having a garden at my house, whereby I just have to get into my garden to get vegetables or tomatoes or onions, or even walking distances that I can walk. I try to walk. Waste separation, this is the other thing that we have managed to do, though it has its own constraints. Reducing food waste. People they eat, you just don't have to take everything because because you have seen the food, but at least you should take small amounts of food. And I'm also working on being a vegetarian. At the moment, I'm taking white meat, and hopefully by 2021, I will be a full-time vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, what what kind of international climate activists, youth-led groups inspire you? Do you follow Fridays for Future or Extinction Rebellion, or what groups around the world are you following?
Yeah, of course, at the moment, Fridays for Future is the most common group that has been trending since Greta Thunberg did a thing. But also, I think I follow more Extinction Rebellion because there are three demands that they are giving to the government. I believe each and every country, if we could have people like that demands only three things to their government, it could really be a better place. I'm also part of UNGO, which is which is an international platforms, the Children and Youth Constituency under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So I've been doing a lot of work under UNGO. And here in Africa, we have what you call the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, which started as a movement, but I now work for AYICCZim, African Youth Initiative on Climate Change. So those are some of the movements that I follow.
And what are the three demands that Extinction Rebellion is making of your government?
The three demands are to reach a carbon zero by 2025, and to tell people the truth that climate change is real, and taking care of the environment is very essential. And I think the third one is to do with policy on climate action.
And in terms of the UN efforts, what are they focusing on? What are you focusing on?
Sorry?
Does that child want to be in the video?
No.
Okay. What are the UN youth organizations focusing on?
In terms of what? Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Yeah. In terms of the UNGO, the UN organization, what are your focuses? Your foci?
Okay, so the Children and Youth Constituency under the UNFCCC has a lot of working groups that will eventually feed into the negotiations that will be done. So it has working groups like the Adaptation Working Group, the Mitigation Working Group, Agriculture Working Group, Loss and Damage Working Group. So it depends with the interest, with your interest as an individual, what you're interested in. Are you interested in renewable energy? There is a working group that is there. So we capacitate each other. And we also have mentors from different UN agencies. Let's say it's FAO, it's UNDP. They capacitate us, they educate us, and try to give us more information on that particular topic. And as young people, we have our experiences and our demands when it comes to renewable energy. We also we have platforms, we can make interventions. Within the UNFCCC negotiations, we can make interventions as young people, representing young people in the whole world. So those are some of the other issues that we do, and we try by all means to localize this information that we have. This is what we do on an international platform, but when we come back home, we try to simplify the information to our fellow youth that do not have internet access, that these are the things that we're working on, and try by all means for our project to feed into those different working groups that we have.
What I've read about young women involved in UN youth organizations is that people who don't speak English felt like they were left out. It made it harder for them to have a presence in the group. And I realize there's translators, but how does the group work with translating languages?
I think the previous COP, that's COP 25, they really tried by all means to have effective and efficient translators. So which means this whole process was inclusive. So in as much as they are not yet there, but they are really trying to include and involve everyone in the negotiation processes.
And do you feel, sometimes youth feel that they're patronized or They really don't have the power in terms of their older mentors. Is that an issue or not with the UN group?
No, it's really not. Of course, I think it's a 50-50 situation. I really cannot say, I really cannot speak on behalf of other young people, but in my own experience, because you're a young person, people, they don't take you serious because you're young, because you have your demands as a young person. People, they will just say, these young people, they're a problem. They just think that everything you do is not is not viable. But I I want to appreciate the UNFCCC for extending this constituency, because Yungo is actually a constituency under the UNFCCC. The UNFCCC has 9 constituencies, and they extended this constituency to the children and youth. So, which means previously young people were not allowed to attend this conference of the parties, but because this constituency was extended to the children and youth, it's actually giving a platform to young people, which is a good thing. And there's also an opportunity of having access to the plenary sessions, where most people, they do not have any access to. So in as much as it is what it is, but at least there are efforts that are being put so that they try to engage young people using an inclusive approach.
In the past at UN conferences, there was upset because known climate activists were not allowed to speak, or they could only speak for a minute or 3 minutes. So there was a sense that strong activists were kind of silenced at UN meetings, conferences. Have you? Is that still an issue or not?
No, I don't think that is an issue. Basing on the post COP25 that we recently had, young people were given an opportunity to speak. And it wasn't even for a few minutes or what. They were given platforms to do their press conferences. A lot of side events wanted to hear from young people what they are doing in their countries, their projects, how they are contributing to their NDCs, which are the National Determined Contributions.
Were you able to go to Madrid?
Yes, I was.
Exciting. Have you been to other ones before that?
Yes, I have been to COP23, the one that was in Bonn, Germany, and COP25, just 2 COPs.
Well, that's exciting. What was your culture shock when you were in Europe? What struck you as, whoa, this is really different?
Okay, so number one, the transport system, of course, because in Madrid it was more of using trains, and the efficiency of the transport system is totally different from what we have here. It's very efficient, it's fast, and you have to plan. You just don't get out of the house and say you're going to the next city, but you need to study the map. You need to understand where you're getting your train from and where you'll be dropping off from. Because if you don't plan your day that way, you eventually get lost. From where I come from, you just get into a small omnibus, and it will take you to wherever you want to go. So it's not that complicated. It's just easy. But then the problem is there are a lot of stops along the way, so it's not that efficient. It's not that effective.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of influence do you feel that young people had at COP? Because I think people weren't very pleased with the outcomes. Not much happened.
Yeah, people might not have been pleased with the outcomes when it comes to the negotiations part, and we had a lot of young people that were playing their part in terms of demonstration, trying to demand urgency, letting the decision makers know that they are watching and they are waiting for the results. Though it wasn't that way, but I'm glad that as young people, in as much as the results were not very pleasing. As young people, we did our best. We tried by all means. We did our interventions, and it will be up to us to implement whatever issues that we contributed to implement it in our different countries. And I think that spirit should keep on. We should keep on having that spirit in as much as we are disappointed. I mean, these are negotiations. At times you agree, at times you disagree. And if you disagree, you postpone. But we have a problem if they keep on postponing each and every issue, because at times we need to, to just agree on a certain thing. It should be a 50-50 on both parties so that we move forward. So if they don't do that, it means that they keep on affecting this generation and the generations to come, because maybe they'll keep on postponing. We're hoping that this year there'll be some resolutions on Article 6, but nothing came out of Article 6, and it was postponed to some of the SB's meetings that will be most probably happening this year, which are actually postponed because of the COVID-19.
So are you planning to go to Scotland for the next COP?
Yes, I'm planning to go to Scotland. Planning is not a problem, but the problem that we face is the issues to do with funding. You can plan to go, but it would depend if you have the funding to attend or not. So definitely, I would love to go to Scotland because I feel like I have a lot to give. I have a lot to contribute to. And for me, it's not a matter of traveling. It's a matter of being the voice of the voiceless, representing those who do not have these platforms, the vulnerable young people that we work with that are being affected by these effects each and every day, living with them day in and day out. So it's not only about traveling, but it's about being the voice of the voiceless.
Social movements really rely now on telling stories as a powerful way to have impact and change people's mind. So if you were going to tell a story about the impact of climate change on people that you know or have worked with, what story would you tell?
For me, that will not be a problem because I live in Africa. And Africa is one of the most vulnerable continents when it comes to the effects of climate change. My story will not be one. It will be a lot of stories to tell because last year we had huge floods that affected Cyclone Idai, which affected a lot of people. Some people are still missing up to today. And I have a sister who lives in an area that was being affected by those cyclones. So I really have a big story to tell, and we have been affected by a lot of droughts in our country, which has affected food security. The list is endless. If food security is affected, we have poverty, we have malnutrition, we have economic instability, considering that agriculture contributes is the backbone of the country and also contributes to the GDP of the country.
Mm-hmm. What tactics in, say, Madrid do you think were most effective? I mean, being on the streets, talking to individual decision makers. What do you feel that you did that was most effective, say, in Madrid?
Well, what I did was to tell my story as it is, because my story and someone's story from Europe is totally different. I have my own experiences. I have a unique story, and it is good that as African we have our African solutions for our African problems. So what made an impact was to tell my story as it is, not sugarcoating it. If we are in need of technical assistance to adapt, especially to adapt, not to mitigate, not saying that mitigation is not important, but from where I come from, the effects are so severe that we are rather opting for adaptation measures than mitigation measures. This is the best.
What's an example of adaptation versus mitigation, say, in agriculture?
Okay, so we have a component of climate smart agriculture. This is an adaptation to, though climate smart agriculture, it covers the reducing greenhouse gases, which is mitigation, adapting, improving resilient communities, and making sure that after the mitigation and the adaptation part, there is food security. So this is another way that we are trying to advocate for. And as for climate smart agriculture, it's quite expensive to implement. So since it's expensive to implement, we need a lot of technical assistance. We need a lot of financial assistance to implement climate smart agriculture, be it in rural or in urban areas.
So does that mean introducing new strains of wheat or rice or whatever the staple food is that are adapted to the warmer climate or whatever it is?
Yes, yes.
And are
Yes.
new strains of crops being introduced?
Yes, yes, they are. We have agencies that are actually working on it, trying to come up with different seed varieties that at least adapt to the temperatures that we are currently experiencing here. So yeah, it does include all that.
You're also involved with a third group, the African Focused Youth Climate Group. Could you say a word about that? What your focus is there?
Yes, I'm part of the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, and I'm also an ambassador, the African ambassador of the African Youth Climate Hub, an initiative that started in Morocco. So basically, the what we are working on is more or less the same, but we focus on issues to do with climate finance, biodiversity conservation, gender mainstreaming, the gender action plan, having realized that also women and young children are very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So in line with the Agenda 2030, we need to leave no one behind. So we are just mainstreaming the gender action plan into our climate change activities. Climate change awareness, I talked about this. Yeah, basically, those are some of the things that we're working on.
So, what are specific examples of how the gender plan would work? What are you advocating? What changes?
What we are advocating is to empower the women. Gender refers to both men and women, but we want to empower the women because we have realized that when we're having droughts like this, she has to travel long kilometers in fetch of water, in fetch of firewood, and she has to make sure that the family has eaten. She spends more time in the field. So we want to empower her, knowing that, of course, in as much as you rely on maybe rain to feed rain for agriculture, but there are other ways, green ways that you can do. It could be renewable energy. They could tap into the renewable energy sector, and not for women to be known as end users of energy, but for them to know that they also have a role to play in the value chain, the energy value chain. Even in terms of agriculture, they can tap into agribusiness, adding value in their produce, something like that. So this is what we are doing, and this is what we are advocating for. They should be resilient and they should be strong. This is the message that we give them, that climate change is affecting everyone, but you could be a vulnerable group, but you can adapt to the effects of climate change, and you can actually get an income as a woman in trying to adapt.
What are some ways to find water besides walk further to a water source, a borehole or whatever it is? What kind of methods are you suggesting to make water access easier?
We can try to invest into water harvesting techniques, actually. But the thing is, some of these things are quite expensive as usual. But we can invest into that. For now, if it rains, we put our buckets outside so as to fetch water, because we have reached to that situation where we say water is it's a human right, but it's not there. So these are some of the methods that we can try to invest in as a country. Um, Having solar powered bowls to run our agricultural fields, because we cannot depend on or rely on electricity, because at times it's there, at times it's not there. So if it's run by solar, that could be better. So those are some of the things that we are trying to advocate for.
And are there those individual small solar panels in rural areas yet? Is that a hope, or is it happening?
Well, it's happening, but I cannot say in rural areas, but it's a matter of who can afford to have a solar panel being implemented at his or her own farm. Like I said, some of these methods, they are quite expensive. Not everyone can afford them. So the vulnerable will keep on remaining vulnerable because they cannot afford these. So that's why we need a lot of investors. We need, innovative minds, because we also don't want to rely on donor money per se, but we need innovative minds, how best we can generate income to implement those sustainable projects.
Right. Could you say a little bit more about the Morocco project that you mentioned?
Oh yes, so this is an African hub. It's an African hub which was created or established by the royalty in Morocco. So it's called the Africa Climate Hub, African Youth Climate Hub, under the Mohammed Foundation. So basically, what they're trying to do is to create a hub for young people, exchanging information, exchanging knowledge, trying to invest into their projects so that they can be sustainable, finding ways they can mitigate, adapt, they can tap into green business. Green business, it could be agribusiness, it could be any kind of business, but trying to promote green thinking within young people.
Um, of all the groups that you work with, roughly what percent are young women rather than men?
Actually, we work with youth. So they are young people, like we can partner with organizations that already work with women. But our objective mainly is our youth. So we usually partner with organizations that work with women so that we we have a huge audience. So we don't have a database of the women that we work with, but we have a database of youth that we work with. Though we strongly encourage the gender and climate action.
Around the world, it seems like a large majority of climate activists, young climate activists, are young women. And do you see that, or do you see it's like about equal in terms of organizers, leaders, activists?
I just don't know, but when women or girls tend to have an idea, and the moment they try to pursue it, it really goes far. So I think that was the situation in this case, that if a woman or a girl has love for nature, she really takes it far to that extent. So I'm still yet to see a lot of male activists that are into climate change, but this also shows that this is a platform that women initiated, and we are still leading. It's sort of like women and girls empowerment, which I really encourage and which I actually admire so much.
Do you think of yourself as a feminist?
Am I a feminist? Yes, I am.
Everybody is saying yes, whereas maybe a decade ago, young women would say, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in equality. So I think things have changed. It's not a bad word
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, it's not. It's not.
Why do you think that young people are uniquely activists? I mean, I don't think other generations had 9-year-olds, 11-year-olds leading activist groups. So it's unique for your generation. Why are you able to be such a strong voice?
I think the other reason that we are a strong voice is the generation that we are in. We have been so much exposed. We have a lot of things that are going on in terms of social media. So it's easy for us to relate better. And that's why we have activists as young as maybe 9-year-olds, because they've been seeing things on social media, on the TV, on the radio. Yet back then it was not that case. And we have managed to build on what we have. We have gone as far as getting education in relation to what we have seen on social media, so as to widen the knowledge that we have on environmental issues and climate change. And this is what makes us unique. This is what makes us very special. And this is also what makes us people to listen to our demands.
It seems that part of that activism requires confidence, belief in yourself, and that your voice should be heard. And previous generations were told young people should be seen, not heard. You should, respect authority. So it seems like this generation is very confident. Do you agree with that? And if so, why?
Yes, this generation is very confident, very intelligent, I can say, tech savvy, I can say, fussy about technology, because it takes some guts for one to stand in front of a parliament and say, I'm demanding for this. The boldness that is within this generation is just amazing. And this is the energy that we need for the world to change. So, yeah, these are actually my thoughts concerning that.
But why do you think your generation was able to be so bold?
Like I said, we have a lot of developments that are going around in terms of technology. You don't have to go to school to be educated. That's point number one. You can actually get the information that you want over the internet. And if you are at school and if you also have access to the internet, then that is a big plus. So I think this could be, I mean, we are very flexible as well. Besides having the technology, besides, the other things, we are quite flexible as young people. And as for our generation, I think the thing to do with having access to information has really helped us a lot, because you just don't go to demand for action if you don't know your demands. So which means that before I go to demand for any action, I need to read what I want, and I need to read and understand exactly what I want. Because we have had young people as young as Greta, as young as Lisipria, having press conferences, and they answer so well. They respond to the questions so well because they have broadened their minds. They read all the time. They equip themselves all the time. So this is the information that we have, that we get each and every day. Having technology, but we are using it in a good way, not in a bad way. So these are some of the advantages that this generation has.
I've heard lots of adults say around the world that they rely on young people to teach them about technology and help them connect to the internet or whatever. So I'm wondering if that kind of having adults defer to them as their teachers added to youth confidence.
Yes, definitely. I mean, if my mother or my father is having a problem with his or with their phones, they actually asked me to fix that phone because they know that I know how to fix it. I can go to the settings and play my magic there. So it actually boosts your confidence. I mean, it starts within the family. If your mother has trust in you, or if your brother has trust in you that you can do this, then you begin to feel confident that even if you say whatever you're going to say, the world is going to believe you, because the confidence has started within the house.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. In Zimbabwe, roughly what percent of young people have access to internet and go all the way through high school?
I'm not sure of the percentage, but in Zimbabwe, number one, internet is very, very expensive. So already it's a barrier, which means not everyone can have access to internet because it's quite expensive. And maybe if I'm to give an approximate figure, maybe it could be 20% of people with access to internet, because only a few who are in the urban areas can afford internet. Then the majority that are in the rural areas, they don't even have phones that that allow them to go on the internet, and they don't even have good internet connection. So it's actually a big challenge, and they rely on us, the few ones we have access to internet, to then simplify that information that we have received, the information that we read on the internet, break it down and try to translate it in a way that they understand, so that we are on the same page, so that they understand and they know what is expected of them.
So that means that you need to go out to the rural schools and give talks and workshops and that kind of thing.
Yes, which is what we actually do. We go out there. We have some books that have been translated into local languages that we use to try to pass the information so that they understand.
That's a lot of work. One problem that activists face is burnout. You just get tired because it takes so much time and it's such a struggle. How do you and the groups that you work with deal with burnout?
Yes, that is very true. You get so tired, especially if you keep on doing the same thing again and again, again and again. So we try to add some fun, so that people, they still have that momentum, they still have that energy. For example, we have actually started doing workshops on how art can communicate on climate change related issues. So this is quite fun, where we have different artists. We have painters, we have musicians, coming up with innovative ways they can try to communicate and pass on the climate change message. So we really have to, you need to come up with something new, but it's more like doing the same thing, but coming up with innovative and interesting ideas, so as to keep young people interested in what you're doing and what you're saying.
Another issue in activist groups sometimes is who's the most pure politically. Like there's shame about flying. Like if you fly in an airplane, you're polluting the environment, and you're not environmentally pure. Do you find that those kind of purity issues are reality or not?
Well, yeah, I think it also depends. I mean, it just depends with one person. In as much as we try to encourage people to reduce their carbon footprint, reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, but you're not in everyone's schedule. I mean, if someone has 3 meetings in a row, and if they think that it would be faster for them to be in a plane so that they can get in time for their 3 meetings, then that's it. But then if I'm also flexible, if it's just 1 meeting, and if I know where I want to go, I can use a better alternative. That would be better. For example, like most African countries, their transport system is not that efficient and it's not effective. So, for example, if I want to go to another country, let's say I'm traveling to Uganda for the African Climate Week, It's either I'm going to use a bus or I'm going to use a plane. The bus, if I use a bus, I will take 3 days in the bus. If I use a plane, I'll take something like 5 hours. But there are also issues to do with hygiene. Where will I bath? It's a lot of things that could be involved. But it's a 50-50 situation. And I think it also depends with the person, if he or she is flexible, depending with their schedule. But if the bus is flexible for you, then take the bus. If the train is flexible for you, then take the train. I cannot travel to Madrid in a train. That is that is difficult for me to do. And even our ships, they are not effective, or we actually don't have, because we're in a landlocked country. So the best way I can get to that city to attend that special conference is to get into a plane. It just depends with the schedule that I have and with the accessibility, the reliability of the transport system.
Another issue that people are talking about as organizers is a desire to have kind of a flat organizing system rather than a hierarchy, like a military hierarchy with bosses and subordinates. So my question is, how do you have that kind of democratic system and get things done?
Well, at times it's really difficult, but I'm actually operating in a non-hierarchical system. I mean, Yungo we don't have any hierarchy, but it's just a bunch of volunteers that are trying to do something good for Mother Earth. But it requires a lot of commitment. It requires a lot of coordination, because if you're operating in a non-hierarchical system, then you have to be very, very coordinated. Your communication is supposed to be on point, because the moment you don't do that, or if you don't communicate well with someone, they will start. They might take it otherwise, that maybe you're being bossy or what. So it has its own challenges. Though maybe the system just taught us that. If you want to have something done, it should be in a hierarchy. So trying to adjust and adapt to a non-hierarchical system, if you have been exposed to a hierarchical system, it might take some time, but it actually works, because I'm part of it, and I've seen the results.
So let's say that, do you do most of your organizing online, conference calls, electronically rather than face to face?
Yes, definitely, because Yungo it represents each and every young person around the world that is into climate related issues. So which means that we are in different countries. Even the volunteers that are part of the bottom lining teams, we are totally in different countries and different continents. So our meetings are online. We have a mailing list where information is shared with the rest of the young people. At times we only meet once at the conference of the parties, at times maybe twice. It just depends, conference of youth and conference of the parties. But everything that we do is done online, reducing our carbon footprints, reducing waste, etc.
But who decides, okay, at our next meeting, our agenda is we're going to talk about A, B, C, and D, and so is going to be responsible for this task, and this person is who does. Somebody has to take responsibility for that organizing, no?
Oh, yes, somebody has to take responsibility. That's true. That is why I mentioned the issue to do with coordination. We really have to be coordinated, which is why we have different working groups. So each working group has someone who leads the working group. So that person who leads the working group can suggest or call for a meeting, or reach out to the working group. Let's say it's the agriculture working group. I can reach out to the agriculture working group and maybe propose, do you think we should have a meeting? And if people say yes, then we draft the agenda together. Then we come up with a date together. We come up with a time together. Then we have the meeting. People will volunteer, who will be taking the notes for the meeting, who will be taking the action points. This is all on voluntary basis. We do it together. So those who will not be able to attend the meeting, they'll follow the notes and see what was shared during the meeting.
And like in Yungo, what percentage of the people who are really involved are young women?
I really cannot tell because Yungo has, I think, more than 7,000 members now. Yeah, more than 5,000 members now. So I really cannot tell because I've been part of Yungo, I think, for 2.5 years, and I started being in the BLT that was last year. So I do not have much information on how many people are female or are women.
Okay. Um, Overall, are you optimistic or pessimistic about our ability to tackle climate change and global warming?
I'm very optimistic about it. Yeah, I'm very optimistic.
Why?
I believe each and everyone has a role to play, and it is not. Before we used to think that the government has to do everything for us, but when you are in the field, when you read more, when you understand more, you get to believe that each and everyone has a role to play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So, which is why I'm too optimistic because it is mainly based on an individual day-to-day life. What you are doing, what are you doing to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions? What are you doing to mitigate to the effects of climate change?
Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? What will you be doing?
5 years from now, I know I'll be a decision maker. I'll be a decision leader, actually, taking lead in issues to do with environmental politics, environmental conservation, climate change negotiations. That will be me in 5 years' time.
Would you work with the government or with an NGO or just by yourself, or what would be your platform?
Yeah, I think I would want to work with the government because I think the government is too system. I mean, they work with the system, um, which at times is good to question. But if you're now part of the decision makers, it means that if you have also had experience working with an NGO, you stand to have better decisions and you tend to contribute more with valid points. So I would love to be part of the government and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of how to be an effective organizer, how to turn this around, generational or gender issues that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I also believe in having, intergenerational dialogues where we have decision makers and young people on the same table, because currently we have a huge gap that is there. I'm 29 years old. Maybe the next time I'm going to be a leader, I don't know when it will be because there's that gap that is there. So there is need for us to constantly have these dialogues, how best we can shape our continents, how best we can work together, the decision makers and young people, in protecting our planet Earth. At times, young people are seen as threats, but we are not threats. We actually have their best interest at heart because they have set out the foundation for us to start building on. So it is important to learn and hear from them, and from them to hear from us our demands and what we intend to do. I'll give a reference. If you've watched the King Lion, Simba the King Lion, if you have watched that cartoon, Simba was born and Mufasa was Simba's father. Simba was not born today, and he was not born today, and tomorrow began to be a leader. But it took a lot of time. I mean, Mufasa had to invest into Simba for him to be a very good leader. So this is what we actually need. They need to invest in us so that we can be better leaders tomorrow. And there are hardships which Simba faced along the way, and most probably the hardship that Mufasa faced are not the same problems which Simba had to face, you know. So these are the things that I'm talking about, the intergenerational dialogue, the importance and how powerful intergenerational dialogues are today.
Terrific.